So yeah, my name is Ugo Osuji. I am an AI deployment engineer lead at Ryder. I'm also an educator at Prom Circle, and yeah, excited to be here.
I'm kind of interested in this kind of a very important question. We call the from the prototype to the production, right? A lot of companies struggle with that kind of a process. I think
Mhm.
in your presentation, you also mentioned in your first example about how to scale it. When you kind of just scan the document from like few hundred, 100 to many many thousands, right? So I try to connect that with your article because you're talking about earlier in your article, you talked about the mindset of minimal viable product concept, and also you talked about the UX. Basically,
Yes.
UX is to make it easy to adopt, right? Make it easy for people to use it. So the first question is, do you think these points is basically not only helping to build the successful prototype, but is also helping the scaling of the adoption?
Absolutely. And I think each one layers on the other, right? I think for me, the very first step is, do you have an acceptance that the vi minimal viable product is a valuable solution? That when we
Hmm.
actually put it in front of the client and they run through their tests, that it's actually working. Because I'm not thinking about scale that initial time. I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
the actually work. And once you kind of take off that box, and we've been able to validate that correctly, then that means that we can now talk about scale, which is a mixture of architecture and technical decisions that you have to make and tweaks, tests, experiments, so many things before you sort of get to a point where you can scale. And I think LLMs are unique in the sense that there are some factors that you have to consider when you think about scale. Um,
Such
most
as,
most applications they're API based. You call an API and you get a response, usually very quickly. With LLMs, they take longer because they have to think, they have to reason, they have to do all these things. So when you
hmm,
think about when you're building for scale, one of the biggest considerations you have to think about is how the latency works. And that becomes like a big challenge. The other piece, of course, being like, how do you test at scale, right? Because, you know, you're testing for things like hallucinations and errors and stuff like that. How do you do that at scale? So there are a lot of considerations, and also like a lot of the technologies that exist today, like the compute or infrastructure that exists today, wasn't really natively from the ground up designed for this type of systems. So what we're finding is a lot of companies are now starting to invest there. So you think about companies like Daytona, Cloudflare, Vercel. They're making big investments in compute that is tailored towards LLM specifically. So those are considerations that you have to think about when you're building for scale as well.
that's great. But I think, from your client's perspective, of course, actually, this is more from the holistic system, from hardware to software, if I use that term. But from client perspective, I think I heard you talking about, and of course, the given thing is you mentioned them again, is you don't start with the so-called agentic AI fancy shining project. You start with the business problem. I think that's a really kind of drive home, and I think you don't even think about the agentic stuff. You think about how to improve increase your business kind of in a gain kind of thing, right? But from company perspective, beside this, maybe I guess the data is kind of one thing. Um, from the usage perspective, data is one thing. Do you think is also kind of an interoperability with the partners agent? That might be another big thing. The governance policies, kind of a ethical accuracy, these kind of things, right? And anything else, I think you tend to think that's a kind of tend to be a building blockers for these companies to realize the value, the client.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point. Governance. I think governance is such a big one. You look at a lot of IT security teams, they've been dealing with, a certain type of system and they know what to expect from those systems. And over the years, they've built out standards and frameworks to kind of understand how to manage those systems. So, and I think this is where, companies like Writer, like if you kind of ask us what our biggest differentiator is in the market, I think is really around things like governance, actually. It's like, okay, as an
Oh,
example, you're building an agentic system. You're going to interact with tools. So you're going to interact with the Salesforce, your CRM, your marketing, you're going to interact with all these different systems. So who has access to interact with those systems? Is it safe for the agent to have access? So you almost have to think about the agent now as a new person who's
yeah, yeah, I know.
so how do you grant them access and what type of access and how do they kind of use that information? So yes, very big. And I wouldn't say anyone has solved for this completely, but I think everyone is trying to have like a perspective on it and say, okay, maybe you treat the agent as a person and then you give them their own sort of access policies and things of that nature. And some other people are thinking, no, man, maybe you should give access to the person who's using the agent and so on and so forth. So there's so many different, I'll call them experiments and validation that is going on right now to figure that aspect out. But yeah, it's a very big part of getting things to scale and getting things into production. In fact, I think we probably spend a significant amount of time working with IT teams trying to get, the green lights from them to actually put these things into production.
Oh, well, when you say IT team, you're talking about a client IT teams or
Client
writers?
IT
Like,
the
oh, yeah.
client, yeah. So we're constantly putting them in touch with our security team to make sure that they feel comfortable. I talked about 0 day retention as an example, right? So, is my data going to be somewhere in your server for, a longer period of time than expected? How do you handle, what are the guardrails that you have around inputs that come in? So you see a lot of organizations now have guardrails as an offering that they pair with their models. So when you ask a certain type of question, the guardrail kicks in first and sort of gates what goes into the model, and stuff like that. So yes, I think governance, what you raise about governance is such a huge aspect of this, especially for industries that are regulated as well. But I think more generally speaking, everyone should be mindful because you've already started to see the exploits that are happening. You see a lot of companies are getting hacked, or there's some security vulnerabilities that agents are presenting. So I think one of the common exploits, as an example, is with skills. So if you go to the public domain and download a skill, you might not know that as part of the skill, people have injected some security, exploits as instructions for your agent to carry out and things of that nature. So I think there's and I think even for as opportunity for people who are looking for problems to solve in the space, things like, how do I solve for security? I think you've heard about Mythos and a few other models that are coming out now that are like
Yeah, yeah.
cybersecurity focused and things like that. So yeah, governance, huge, 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 huge consideration for getting anything into production for sure.
Just quickly, actually, I talked to one company. They have some kind of workaround. For example, if it's kind of they're not sure, they're not confident about this a partner's kind of a governance policy on their side, they just have some kind of a primitive workaround, which is not hugely scalable. So when you or writer face these kind of problems, do you have some kind of temporary solutions, at least get you started to address some of these kind of issue when infrastructure is not ready?
It really depends on each organization and their appetite for experimentation. I think one of the things we try to do is let's start with a pilot, like
Mm.
just more on a strategic point of view to say let's pilot this thing out. And usually, what I've found is like when you do a pilot with an organization, going back to what I said about buy-in, getting the buy-in of whoever those stakeholders are, they feel like we've built this together. Then they become the people who push for those changes in their organization to make things happen, whether it is a change, a relaxed, a more robust rule set that allows for, rolling something like this out maybe to a subset of people to test and then gradually sort of expand what they're capacity is to handle solutions of this kind. But I think it's not so much of a technical walk around as it is more like strategically, how are you engaging with the stakeholders? And also, like one of the things that we found is when we go to most companies and talk to them about connecting to their internal systems, as an example, they might be a little bit skeptical. The IT might not be interested. Then we escalate it up to someone in the C-suite and say, this is the barrier between, and this is the blocker between getting, your AI strategy up and running. So, you need to come sponsor this, and you need to come unblock us and things like that. And we find that that actually helps in some cases. And do you know what? I mean, I did my MBA 15 years ago, and the same concepts still apply, right? It is about, who's your sponsor of this particular project, and how, how is leadership tied in and involved and all these types of things. Those things are still true in terms of
I
like,
agree.
I mean, if you think about it and in sales, they do this a lot in sales, and the sales folks are very, very adept at this at drawing these influence maps
Yeah,
where you
yeah.
say, okay, who has the most influence? Who's the decision maker? Who's the detractor? Who's, what you kind of draw those maps and then you figure out like a plan of attack. But on the implementation side, I think what I've found to be really useful is quickly get a win that people can buy into. Like get something people can buy into very, very quickly. If people start feeling a little bit queasy about your solution and starting to take time, they're not seeing any progress, they can't really test anything,
Mm.
they can't validate anything, they lose interest, and naturally that project sort of dies off that way. But if you can get, and that's why you kind of almost, for me, I tend to break the rules in that way, like not thinking about what our project plan was, but like I want to get a goal. I want to get like an outcome quickly, like as fast as possible. Something just to get that validation and get that buy-in. And once you get that buy-in, you can now bring them on board, and then that they start to become the champions who help you to unblock things as well. So yeah, but I agree that there's so many tactical and strategic things that you have to put in,
I didn't realize now it makes 100% perfect sense. Even as like a consultant helping company, I originally I view as a very, very technical in AI engineer,
Yeah.
but seems to be have to do lots of this kind of entrepreneur thing, inside a large corporation because especially when you say you break the rules. Oh, that kind of struck me because corporate
Yeah.
innovators, they have to break a lot of rules.
Yeah, people sometimes feel like, you're breaking the rules. It's not necessarily about like it's about what you're trying to
Yeah.
accomplish, and of course you have to do it within all the legal constructs, and you're not trying to do anything weird or anything, but it's about like how you approach things. So waiting for permission sometimes can be detrimental to getting that quick win. And yeah, but I agree with you. I think when I got obsessed about getting things into production, I realized that it wasn't always a technology problem all the time. There is a three-legged stool all the time, is technology, process, and people. So it's always a combination of those things. And if one of them is lacking, then you're not getting into production regardless.
Yeah. Pro
I think to the point you made about business units, that's kind of our framing right now is, can we get AI to take root
yeah.
within business units? I think we're doing a lot now with marketing teams and sales teams, go-to-market teams, and like, how do you empower those folks? Because usually, and you see this in a lot of enterprises, the gatekeepers of technology would be like the IT, the corporate IT team, which, obviously they want control, which is fair, which makes a lot of sense and is very important. But in terms of innovation, the problem is like they're stretched on their end. So they can't necessarily always have the resources to assign permanently to a business unit team to do the thing. And I think that's where AI is kind of equalizing, or, kind of putting that
Yeah,
sort.
we have a term. We have a term called the democratize.
Yes, that's the perfect term. That's the perfect term. Is so now pe people in those teams can pick these things up, and when you get the power users and you get those champions and folks, and then get the leaders, the right leaders in there. Some of the best people I've worked with are leaders in these teams that are obsessed about, whether it's efficiency, they want to drive efficiency, and they care about it. Like they care about it so much. And when they do, good things tend to happen, when
Yeah,
you
I
put,
agree. Actually, this is also my finding. Basically, as exactly as you said, uh, unlike IT typically tend to be centralized at the corporate level, right? But I think with the AI, because the AI is so embedded in different functions, in different department, and the AI, technology people alone cannot make it happen. You have to work with the local domain people to make it
yeah,
happen. So I
yeah,
also see there's another issue. Once you build the AI system, the game is far from over. It may be just the start of the new game. But these
yeah,
people who maintain the AI system, expand the AI system, modify the AI system, they need to be deeply rooted in functional areas, right?
yeah.
So with that, I even heard people kind of using a new term. I thought it's kind of an excellent term. Instead of a traditional centralized IT department at the corporate level, now some people propose this kind of a called a hub and a spoke system. Have you heard
Oh,
that term?
yeah, yeah, I have. I've heard of that. You're taking me back to to my business
Yeah,
uh
yeah,
school days. Yes, the hub and spoke approach. I think you need IT definitely for control
yes,
because you have to have control at that level. It has to be centralized. Like the governance that we're talking about, like all these systems, and I think this is like instructive for anyone who's building like an AI system, is like you have to build some kind of control
yeah,
center.
yeah.
IT can take over and they kind of monitor, even especially monitoring, what's going on in the system. Is it up? Is it down? Whatever it is, are there exploits that are happening? All these things need to be controlled by IT. But the actual innovation is where the spokes from the hub, comes the actual building. They're the ones who have the context. So with AI, what we're seeing is like, yeah, people can own the building of their own automation. And for a long time, I think even things like CRM systems wanted to do stuff like that, but it wasn't always
Mm.
easy to do. You still needed to go hire either external consultants or hire a team of engineers. They were called like innovation teams that were embedded in these business units and things like that. But now I think the democratization factor means that more and more people on a team, if you hire the right person, I think going back to what we're discussing about people who are more adaptable, people who are cleared eye and creative can do some incredible stuff with some of these agents.
Yeah, actually, I also technology now is moving toward that direction, like making it much easier for a lot of people to kind of build the system without deep kind of
Yeah.
technology kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. So it's on the leader. It's on the leader to sort of draw that roadmap and understand really, okay, this is what we do right now. These are where the opportunities lie and what are the best opportunities. Usually my advice to anyone would be always go for high impact, low effort as your first piece to tackle. If the moment you go into like high efforts, even high effort, high impact, the problem is like you could lose momentum and lose steam. You need quick win. You need wins. I think it's even human psychology is that you get small wins can sort of build momentum over time. But
I
when you're
agree.
bogged down in a long running project that is not really yielding anything, then there's fatigue.
Actually, Ugo, you raise an excellent point. It's even for kind of a prototype to production. Of course, this is just a simplified analogy. Even for kind of a, the prototype to in production kind of a scenario, having a small win does not necessarily mean you only stuck within the prototype. It could also mean small scale production, right?
Yes,
In a
yes,
controlled environment, then give companies or people confidence to go to the next step or go give them the middle the motivation to expand to make it more complicated, right? So I
yeah.
think it just to kind of apply to all these kind of things. So one more issue we didn't discuss, but maybe we can talk about, I think it's a huge issue is budgeting. of
I
course, the
mean,
token economy, right?
yeah,
Token economy. I think it's not sustainable because for companies doing things, not knowing how to budget, it doesn't make
yeah,
sense to me. It's
yeah,
right at the large scale. It doesn't make
yeah.
sense.
It's very difficult. I think, but I don't think it's going to be a long-lasting problem. I just think I think we're just still learning how to do that right now because again, remember these agents or models are going to get better. And what we've seen generally speaking is that with model improvement, we're seeing the costs of tokens come down actually. So I think we're going to get to a point where we'll be able to budget better. I think so many things need to happen. I think we need to have benchmarks. We need to have optimized architectures that make sure that we're not wasting tokens. A lot of agentic, by the way, a lot of agentic solutions right now sometimes are overkills, which lead to like token
Waste,
waste.
yeah.
So that is happening. But I think that discipline of correctly using tokens and making sure that we guard them almost the same way you kind of guard any other finite resource. I think we're going to get to that point where those discipline. So again, on that opportunity for someone to go dive into stuff like that, right? Which is talking about these things just kind of turns the wheels because there's so many opportunities of things that can be
Yeah,
done.
that's true. And also, actually, as you point out, because right now this is not a huge problem because the overall scale of this AI thing is not huge, right?
Yeah,
Because,
okay.
company, they
Yeah,
still just like, the early days of doing the new venture development,
yes.
companies don't know how much it will cost. So they say, hey, it's just, it's a kind of small scale, which is a waste of small money. But once AI goes to large scale, which will happen very soon,
Mhm.
this is a very serious problem, need a solution for that. Otherwise, it's not scalable. That's how
Yeah,
I view it.
it's not sustainable. Yeah, I think like there are things I disagree with. Like I said, like token maxing is this concept of people having leaderboards in their organization, kind of tracking how much people have spent on tokens. But I think it incentivizes the wrong behavior. Because this is not new because there was a time when developers were judged by the number of lines of codes that they wrote.
Oh, that's a
which
wrong KPI, wrong
which
KPI.
is a terrible KPI because what tends to happen is like people optimize will generally be incentivized to write longer lines of code. And the same thing is happening right now. People will be incentivized to use way more tokens so that they can hit these leaderboards. So the true incentive goes back to what we talked about is the business outcome at the end of the day, and you want to get to that outcome in the most efficient way possible. I think you should figure out how to reward people for that, and that would be one of the ways to actually figure out ways to to
Actually, I think maybe this is a very natural evolution process. I've seen many similar pattern happen. For new technologies, maybe you start with efficacy, then you move on to efficiency. But
yes.
without figuring out how to make it work, which is an efficacy issue, normally
Mhm.
people don't consider about the efficiency because it doesn't make sense, saving cost, right?
Sure.
You need to find a way to solve the problem first. I guess
Yeah.
that's probably the reason, I guess, right?
Yeah, no, it's fair. I agree that it's about like adoption and getting people using it because I would say, to be very honest with you, a lot of the things, if you want to be really proficient in AI, you have to use it every single day. You have to use it for everything and do it and use it like extensively. And then you start to figure out, okay, so now I know, okay, here are things that are more efficient to do. So to your point, yeah, maybe it's just is the evolution of it. And maybe we should be, but I just feel like the token maxing culture should be something that we pay very close attention to because it can definitely go wrong, and we don't want waste for sure. Because tokens, when we think about tokens, electricity is water for cooling. It's
Yeah. Sustainability, that's a big
yeah,
picture, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that we have to consider, and also like I think smaller models or open source models also that can run on smaller devices I feel like we're getting to a world where, because I think Google released Gemma 4 last week or so, and I think I think Meta might have released one as well, and I think Quen, the Alibaba model, also released something, I think a few days ago, 3.6. So these models, as they get better and as they improve, I think even just for personal use or even for companies, maybe now when you're sending someone their laptop, their work laptop, you're loading an open source model on it, and that way you can at least start to regulate consumption, right? So I think there are so many, facets to it, but there are solutions that I think that are promising that are happening.
For lots of people outside of Silicon Valley, uh, this is still very new thing. How to change their mindset, how to kind of enlightening them in a sense, showing them this the use case is so powerful in the early days. Because many times people say, "Hey, my life is so perfect. My life is works fine. I don't see the need of using AI." You know,
Yeah.
so how to overcome that barrier is such a big thing, right?
Yeah, and I think education obviously is one of those things. One of the things I've been excited about, and I advise a few startups that are pursuing. I take a very big interest in startups that are pursuing small businesses specifically to go adopt AI. And I was working with one of them, and they what they were thinking about is, okay, how do I help this small mom and pop shop
Hmm.
figure out how to use AI? And it turns out that they're very slow hanging fruit that you can show very quickly. Okay, all of your emails are coming in, and you have this agent that is able to sort of do that triage for you and figure out things and route it correctly, maybe suggest a response for you. But I think it comes down to, again, you can't just say, oh, here's AI and go, but you have to kind of contextualize it within the things that matter to people. For a small business owner, it's about how do I get leads? How do I, broadcast what my business is about, and how do I handle service calls or and stuff like that. So those are like really quick opportunities that one can explore to show the value very, very quickly. And once you do that, I think people start to realize, okay, what the potential is.
Yeah,
Versus,
yeah,
oh,
yeah. Your point. Yeah, you have that point. That's an excellent point. Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you. Actually, that's a really great. But I do see, because I also teach a strategy competition. I see there's a push and a pull effect. For early adopters, they really try to adopt the technology to push their business into a new format. But I also see eventually for many companies, there's a pull effect, which means start with the fear. What's the fear? Oh, my competitor might using AI. If I don't do it, I might be irrelevant very soon.
yeah,
So I got to catch up because I can tell you actually actually in our student project we do have a few small company project kind of a startup a small company say, hey, please look at our competitor, how do they use AI.
Thank you for watching.